Physical theology cannot, from the nature of the case, tell us one word about Christianity proper. It cannot be Christian in any true sense at all. Nay, more than this, I do not hesitate to say that this so-called science tends, if it occupies the mind, to dispose it against Christianity. Growing up, I remember a particularly popular argument that was bandied about by adults when I would discuss religion with them. It was the kind of argument, in fact, that was presented as almost a catch-all refutation of atheism. An argument that worked from the interior logic of the universe, evidence that you find just in existing, and then worked outwards to the conclusion that God definitely existed. The argument was, of course, the very famous watchmaker analogy. It was originally formulated by a 19th century clergyman by the name of William Paley, who made the case that just as you would be struck by the obvious reality of an intelligent designer were you to stumble across a pocket watch in an open field, so too does the complexity of material existence guide you to the supposedly self-evident reality of an intelligent designer for the cosmos. It's a very famous argument, as I say, and I'm sure one you're familiar with. In fact, Christopher Hitchens at a certain point considered it fairly redoubtable. He described it as the most persuasive argument that he'd ever encountered for theism.
At some point, certainly, we all asked, well, which is the best argument you've yet come up against from the other side? And I think every one of us picks the fine-tuning one as the most intriguing.
The Goldilocks one. Yeah.
Okay. Fine-tuning the 1 degree, well, 1 degree, 1 hair different to nothing. But even though it doesn't prove design, doesn't prove a designer, could all have happened without it, you have to spend time thinking about it and working on it. It's not a trivial. We all say that.
It seems the world over that people take the basic claims of intelligent design theory, which is the foundation for this particular argument, to be very compelling arguments in favour of the existence of God. So, the question is, of course, why have I titled this video the way I have? Why, as a theist, would I insist on not using intelligent design theory? I'll happily concede at the outset that the intelligent design arguments have the power to be very persuasive, and they do have a real rhetorical force, and that's not without reason. It makes us, at the very least, reflect on fairly thought-provoking coincidences or improbabilities that occur within our universe that really, when you look at the numbers, seem unfathomable. It's really hard, for instance, to argue against the identification of the Hoyle state, which is the specific energy of a carbon-12 nucleus, which, if you push it slightly higher or slightly lower, then it all comes falling apart. When you sort of acknowledge the ostensible fine-tuning involved in aspects like that, and many other physical aspects of the universe, it becomes increasingly difficult to wonder just how this may have come about by result of sheer chance. But in spite of that, there are very good reasons why I wouldn't ever recruit intelligent design arguments when discussing the subject with an atheist. To discover the issues of intelligent design theory, we need to examine more closely the structure of its arguments. I mentioned the watchmaker analogy at the outset, which is the most famous, but we can look at another because the structure is just the same. Take, for instance, a very famous and very vocal advocate for intelligent design theory at the moment, Stephen C. Meyer, and his discussion of information and its encoding in DNA.
If you look at an effect and you want to explain it using the historical scientific method by reference to a cause that is known to produce that effect, the effect in question. So when we're looking at the origin of life, many biologists, biochemists, origin of life researchers in particular say the central thing that we need to explain is the origin of the information that makes life tick, that makes it run. What runs the show in biology is information, much of it encoded digitally in the DNA molecule. We're also learning that there's other forms of information organized hierarchically in other parts of the genome and even beyond the genome. If you want to develop a new form of life from a pre-existing form of life, you have to provide information. And so the question is, where does that information come from? Since the 1950s, origin of life biologists have realized the central thing they have to explain is the origin of information. Model after model has stumbled or even come to a grinding halt, has failed to explain precisely that feature of life. And what we know from uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning in the past, about the past, is that information always comes from an intelligent source. Digital information, for sure, we know it comes from programmers, but information generally always comes from an intelligent source. So by using Darwin's rule of reasoning, I concluded that the best explanation for the origin of the information necessary to build the first life is actually intelligence.
Have a look at the basic structure of the argument, denuded of its specific elements, which are, as I say, quite alluring and quite dazzling on their own. We have a particular aspect of reality, that is to say, a particular existent being, which in this case is the information embedded in DNA. From this particular existent being, we reason to the existence of an intelligent creator by way, and this is the crucial point, by way of the lack of current scientific explanation for this particular being. The complexity and so apparent mystery of the information in DNA in this case means that Maya concludes that there must be an intelligent designer whose artisanship cannot be grasped through purely natural means. We have to ask ourselves whether this is a reliable, rational move to make. I'm sure many of you will have heard the God of the gaps theory, the idea that certain arguments for God are founded on nothing other than the ignorance of contemporary science. When that scientific knowledge is eventually acquired, as typically it is, God shrinks to another lacuna in our understanding, and so on and so forth through the progressive acquisition of further scientific knowledge. This results in an endless regression of different things which humanity does not yet understand or know through its science, but in each case, when we do eventually discover the reasoning behind it, prove not to be this intelligent designer. It is, to speak very bluntly, an informal logical fallacy, namely the fallacy of ignorance. And given the structure of the argument, we can replace the particularities and the specificities of it, in this case the information in DNA, with any other peculiar part of existence. Black holes, quantum mechanics, the Big Bang, you name it. And we're still arguing that because of a lack of current knowledge, God must be the cause, and so we're still committing the fallacy. The other unsatisfactory element to note in intelligent design theory is that all of its arguments, by definition, are inductive rather than deductive, meaning their conclusions are at best nothing more than very likely probabilities, but never logical proofs or concrete assertions that can be apodictically claimed to be true. Even with the argument that gave Christopher Hitchens pause, that is the fine-tuning of the universe for life, we're still only speaking of an induction made from a very, very, very slight probability, rather than a conclusion deduced from a logical necessity, something that theoretically might well be explained, still by a remarkable coincidence. Here we're dealing with a qualitative rather than a quantitative distinction. You can get very close in your probability, but to be definite is to be categorically distinct. That's to really be on the safe side of things. Probability is at best only probability, it's only conjecture, and so it fundamentally lacks as an argument. And incidentally, I might also mention that it's a coincidence that might actually not be all that remarkable if we consider the possibility of alternative universes, different computations which result in sort of aborted universes that didn't result in life, and ours is just the one exception. An exception that is made not all that remarkable given the sheer volume of attempts in different universes to cultivate life. So intelligent design theory is at best an inductive attempt to gesture incompletely to a creator with sometimes very forced leaps of logic, relying on a God of the gaps model, not infrequently in a manner that is, and here's the kicker, pseudo-scientific. Even when you have particularly persuasive arguments, and again I won't deny that they can be very, very persuasive, and indeed sometimes just very interesting reflections on the peculiarity of our universe, there's still a structural issue at play. It lies in the claim that one can identify a particular existent being, and as a result of its ostensible material complexity, intuitively suggest that it is created by God, thereby treating that creativity as though it were merely a supernatural brute event, something over and against the natural order of creation as we otherwise know it. It's a very peculiar understanding of what it means for the world to be created. It's always something that is necessarily subject to the advancements of science, sort of crossing its fingers and hoping that science won't eventually work this one out. And unfortunately for intelligent design theorists, science has won out and will continue to do so. The purpose of intelligent design theory, in its essence, is to poke around the world in order to find instances of irreducible material complexity. Moments like Maya's DNA information, or the Big Bang, or the conception of life at the start of the evolutionary cycle, whatever else it may be. And then noticing that science doesn't have an explanation for it, insisting it must be intelligent design. But we can go further here. Even if science were never to produce an explanation for a given instance of material complexity, intelligent design theory would still be a deeply deficient style of thinking. It is the process of attempting to locate points where the rational structure of reality falls through, where the intelligibility of existence somehow ceases to be. And so it is to try and locate brute facts somewhere in creation, the very same brute fact that naturalists are looking for as an alternative explanation to God. Just because in this case we're talking about a supernatural brute fact doesn't mean anything different, it's just a play of language. So at this point, intelligent design theorists and naturalists are essentially speaking the same language. Both posit that a brute fact explains everything else that is intelligible. One simply calls it a natural event, whether that be the existence of the universe itself or the Big Bang or whatever else it may be, and the other calls it God. But both are making the very same case. Crucially, at a fundamental level, neither are talking about the God of classical theism, either for him or against him. I'll turn to another common argument. There is, sadly, still a widespread skepticism toward basic scientific discoveries in certain religious circles. We might think of American evangelical denominations, for instance. These disavow the fundamentals of evolution and promote creationist education in schools. This strain of thought has seen an interesting development in conjunction with the theory of the Big Bang. Many evangelicals insisted that originally they wouldn't believe in the Big Bang because, well, it seemed to be contradictory to the Genesis narrative. Their literal reading of Genesis, that is. As such, it was perceived as an atheistic alternative to biblical cosmogony. However, as it became apparent that the Big Bang could actually be used to argue for a creator God, given it was talking about something coming from nothing, suddenly attitudes began to shift, and evangelical apologists like Frank Turek will still today appeal to the Big Bang as supposedly incontrovertible proof for the existence of God. Now, aside from the fact that a great number of scientists believe that the Big Bang doesn't actually signify the origin of all existence, and that there probably was more reality before then, perhaps even an infinite cycle of reality, we can identify the problems with this style of thinking through these mutating attitudes. The paranoid guardedness inherent to creationist dogma is present because creationism always already subjects itself to the possibility of being proven wrong by science. It believes that all religious significance is contained exhaustively within the locus of contingent and conditioned historical or scientific facts. So their belief system becomes an irrational tug-of-war between scientific discovery on the one hand and their inflexible dogmatism on the other, because they have from the outset misconstrued the relationship between God and creation. This is exactly what I was saying incidentally in the last video, though in reference to new atheism rather than intelligent design theism. The idea that the Big Bang can serve either as an argument for or against the existence of God, rather than simply being a discrete occurrence within the history of the universe, a single being among the manifold other beings, is misguided. The argument that tries to insist that the Big Bang is evidence for God presumes that God is just one cause amongst many, albeit the one at the very start, rather than the being in which all beings engage in their causal relationships. This is why, even if the universe is temporally infinite, that is, it goes on forever, or there are an infinite cycle of universes, it's not an argument for atheism. In that case, if that were true, existence still relies on God for its creation, just as much as finite existence would. Again, I'll reiterate the light metaphor that I gave in the last video. If we're assuming that God's existence can be proven by the finitude of creation, we are implicitly assuming that God's relationship to creation is like the relationship between two things in the world, like a father and a son, for instance. A father begets a son, but the father can then die and the son would continue on unaffected. But that's not like God's relationship to creation. If you snuff out the light source of a candle, for instance, the candle light cannot possibly persist. In either case, notice how the finitude or infinitude of the universe is simply irrelevant to the discussion. If the universe is contingent, it requires necessary being whether or not it went on in an infinite temporal sequence. So you see, the whole debate between intelligent design theists and atheists on the subject of the Big Bang is simply misguided, because both presume that if you could only prove the universe did or didn't have a beginning, you would be answering the question of whether or not it depended on God. But this is an incorrect inference, because modality and temporality are different things. It doesn't matter whether a contingent thing or a totality of contingent things, which is what the universe is infinite or not. In either case, it is still contingent. Whether the candlelight came to be after the candle was lit, or whether the candle was lit forever, in both cases the candlelight is still absolutely dependent on the candle for its existence. The act of creation is not just one moment that occurs way back when. It is right now, the infinite act of God's being which sustains and pervades all things, the eternal present, as the likes of Augustine and Boethius called it. How could any particular being exist without its capital B being? The very being that it is, the unavoidable fact of its existence. If you take it away, how could it possibly be? But the implicit assumption of the Big Bang argument for the existence of God is that the relationship between God and the world is one that allows for a total independence of creation. As I said in the last video, God is just the one who flicks the first domino. This is what intelligent design theory does. It concerns itself entirely with a realm of facts and events that are irrelevant to God's relationship to creation. They are fighting a pointless battle and losing it. And so they spend their time being very paranoid about the advancements of science when they need not be at all. Intelligent design theory is, I believe, a dangerous distraction from substantial theology, one that risks doing serious harm to the reputation of religion in public discourse, even if it is ultimately well-intentioned in its reverence of the complexity and beauty of material creation. There are far more sophisticated and, to my mind, far more irrefutable arguments to be made surrounding God and his existence. Do please consider subscribing to the channel and see just next to my head, one side or the other, the last video that I was speaking about, in which I point out just a few of the flaws in atheism. Thank you for watching.